Ever feel like you're stuck in a kind of tug of war with yourself?
Oh, definitely.
Like one part of you really wants to do something, finally start that big project, or maybe stop a habit that's not serving you, but then there's this other part that just seems to like dig its heels in.
Absolutely. That feeling of being blocked from the inside.
Exactly. So today we're going to dive into that exact feeling, that inner conflict. Because what if that resistance, that part that seems so stubborn, isn't actually the enemy?
Right.
What if it's actually, well, a crucial piece of the puzzle for real healing and growth? We'll be looking at this through the lens of ISTDP, that's intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, and drawing on some insights from Yuval Alan over at ISTDP Israel.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because, people often walk into therapy feeling so frustrated by these exact blocks.
Right.
There's this conscious part, the part that wants change, the part that's actively seeking help. But then, often underneath, running almost in opposition, there's this current of anxiety.
Yeah.
And, well, over time, to manage that anxiety, we develop these really ingrained defense mechanisms. Things like avoidance, maybe always trying to appease others, keeping big parts of ourselves hidden away, feeling sort of emotionally distant, or just carrying this heavy burden of shame.
It sounds like an internal committee meeting where one group is just terrified and hitting the emergency brake, even while the let's get things done group is trying to floor it.
That's a great way to put it.
So these non-cooperative parts, as we're sort of calling them, they aren't actually trying to sabotage us then.
No, not intentionally.
Yeah.
If you think about the bigger picture, these aren't behaviors born out of, malice or wanting to mess things up. They've learned somewhere along the line, usually way back, to associate being vulnerable or expressing certain feelings with potential pain or danger.
Oh, okay. Learned responses.
Exactly. So these defenses, maybe they served a real purpose once upon a time, but now they've become these automatic reactions that, frankly, get in the way of dealing with the actual emotional stuff happening now.
Right.
So the resistance we feel, it isn't some deliberate act of defiance. It's much more like an old, outdated security system that just keeps going off, perceiving a threat, even when maybe there isn't one anymore.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I think for many of us, the knee-jerk reaction to that inner resistance is to try and just push through it, force ourselves.
Yeah, fight it.
Right. But what we're exploring here, what ISTDP suggests, is maybe a different way. It's less about battling those defensive parts and more about, well, actually listening to them.
Yes. And that raises a really key question. How do you actually create the conditions where these fearful protective parts feel safe enough to even show themselves? The whole point of the therapeutic environment, ideally, is to be that safe space, a place where someone can, little by little, bring forward those aspects of themselves that usually run from discomfort or feel intensely ashamed or prefer to stay hidden, or the parts that just fundamentally don't trust.
So it's not demanding they change, but more like extending an invitation.
A gentle invitation, exactly. Signaling that their presence is actually welcome, that we want to understand them, rather than just telling them they need to be different.
So instead of saying, look, you have to stop avoiding these tough conversations, the approach is more like, okay, let's get curious about why this avoidance feels so necessary right now.
Precisely. And when those hitter, maybe resistant parts start to cautiously emerge in that safe container, that's where the real possibility for healing starts.
Okay.
Because as those defenses soften, even just a little bit, it allows the person to actually connect with the underlying feelings, the very emotions those defenses were working so hard to keep locked away. It becomes a chance to finally acknowledge, maybe for the first time, and process those long-avoided feelings, but within a context that feels supportive, not overwhelming.
So by not fighting the resistance, but actually making room for it, giving it a voice almost, we create an opening to the core emotional wounds underneath.
That's the idea.
And as Yuval describes it, the result of doing that work, it can be really transformative, right? It allows for a more integrated sense of self, where all these different, sometimes conflicting parts can actually coexist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So instead of being constantly driven by that background anxiety and those old automatic patterns, you start to be able to live more from a place of your genuine desires, your authentic self.
Could you give an example? Like maybe someone who always appeased others out of fear.
Right. That person might start to find they can actually express their own needs, maybe set a boundary, without being overwhelmed by the fear that used to stop them. They're not just reacting anymore.
They're choosing.
They're choosing. It's about building what you could call an internal alliance. Not just siding with the part of you that says, I want to get better, but actually extending that alliance to include those anxious parts, the avoidant parts, the ones that seem resistant.
Okay, so it's not about picking sides internally.
Not at all. They aren't separate enemies warring inside you. They're all parts of your whole self, each with its own story, its own reasons, its own protective function, even if that function is now outdated.
And the key to actually fostering this internal alliance, this sense of wholeness, sounds like it really comes down to a specific way of paying attention.
It really does. It requires sensitive, quiet, deeply empathetic listening, both from the therapist towards the patient initially. And then crucially, fostering that same quality of listening from the individual towards themselves, towards all their different parts.
So creating an internal atmosphere where even the most dug-in, resistant parts feel like, okay, maybe I can be heard here. Maybe I'm understood.
Exactly. The therapist actively invites these parts into the room, into the conversation, communicating both verbally and non-verbally. You're not the enemy here. You actually hold really important information for us.
Right, you're valuable messengers.
Valuable messengers, precisely.
So the ultimate goal then isn't to get rid of those non-cooperative parts, to somehow surgically remove the resistance.
Definitely not.
It's more about understanding why they're there, understanding their protective intentions, and integrating their experiences, their feelings, into the bigger picture of who you are, so that you, the individual, can regain a sense of agency, of control over your life.
Yes, but it's a control that comes not from, say, rigid self-discipline or suppressing parts of yourself.
No, that sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. This control comes from a genuine inner freedom, a freedom born from understanding all these parts, making conscious choices, and ultimately from healing those underlying wounds.
It makes me think, listeners might connect with this. Think about those moments in your own life where you've really felt that internal friction, that strong desire to move forward, slamming up against an equally strong, maybe confusing urge to just hold back or run away.
Yeah, that internal battle.
What if, instead of just judging that resistance or trying to willpower your way through it, you could approach it with maybe just a bit of curiosity?
What might you learn?
Right. What could you possibly learn about the fears or maybe the unmet needs that are actually driving that reluctance?
It's just the whole perspective.
Okay, so if we boil it down, the huge takeaway here seems to be that these parts of us that feel resistant, that seem to get in our way, they aren't just roadblocks. They're actually incredibly valuable sources of insight.
Absolutely. Insight into our deepest vulnerabilities, our oldest fears, our fundamental needs.
And by bringing them into the light, with compassion, with understanding, by fostering this internal alliance we've talked about, that's how we unlock a really powerful path towards genuine healing and growth.
Yes. It's not about banishing parts of ourselves we don't like. It's about understanding their story, their function, and integrating them so we can become more whole.
It really highlights this idea that inner conflict isn't necessarily a sign that you're failing, right?
Not at all. Often, it's a really important signal. A signal that some deeper emotional needs aren't being met or haven't been acknowledged.
And by learning to listen, truly listen to all aspects of ourselves, even the parts that feel the most difficult or shameful, we can tap into this incredibly rich source of information and actually move towards greater internal harmony and well-being.
A profound shift.
This has been really insightful, a fantastic deep dive into the healing power of actually embracing our inner resistance, bringing both the alliance and the resistance together into the open. Now, if you listening have any questions about this, or maybe thoughts sparked by our conversation, or if there are other related topics you'd like us to maybe explore in the future, please definitely reach out. The email is avil.uval7@gmail.com. We genuinely love hearing from you.
We do. And maybe just to leave you with a final thought to mull over. What new possibilities might open up for you in your own life if you started approaching your own inner resistance? Not as some obstacle you have to conquer, but maybe as a wise, albeit sometimes misguided, protector. One that holds valuable insights just waiting to be understood.
Ever feel like you're stuck in a kind of tug of war with yourself?